room, please turn on the mics at the table when you have a question. We want to make sure that everyone can hear your question when the Lieutenant Governor answers. Now I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Matt Michels.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everybody listening and being here. The governor is in Washington, as a number of you know, at the National Governors Association meeting. And when he comes back, he'll report on numerous meetings he's having. One of the main ones will be with Secretary Acosta and the Advisory Committee on Workforce Development, Apprenticeships, and some of that development, which he's right in the midst of. Obviously, his passion and our needs for workforce development, but also workforce that matches the needs of our state. And that's one thing I wanted to do, a little unorthodox. I believe that given the schedule that we have after all these years of being here at press conferences, this will be my last one. And I want to thank very much the people who cover what goes on here. It hasn't been easy. The media models and economics really make it more and more difficult to get information to individuals. The caliber of people that we have doing it, though, has never been higher. And the information obviously goes out in different ways. And this is one of those ways that you can get information out and make sure people understand the facts. I want to, the reason I brought Mr. Owen here is, thank you. The reason that I brought Mr. Owen here is that I was incredibly honored and humbled yesterday by him and the organization to give me the Chamber of Commerce and Industry Distinguished Legislative Service Award. And the reason that I hold this up is last night when they presented it to me, it was fairly emotional for me, which surprised me, and was one of those rare times, you'll find this hard to believe, that I was speechless. And I think that as I reflected on that and asked David to join me, why I was speechless is that it's got my name on it, but from a legislative perspective, whether it's our families or others that allow us to serve, we can come up with ideas. The governor and I can come up with ideas, or a legislator can come up with ideas, but we're not implementers. And so although I'm honored and will not ever shy away from this, in the military we will call this goes up on my I love me wall. It's a military phrase. But I want to thank you, David, for your kindness and all that you've done as well, and for this award. But in reality, I wish to accept the award for the people within public service in our state that actually implement. We are getting to a point legislatively where we're going to allocate funds to people. And those are individuals that are taking care of children in need. Those are individuals right now that are at the Human Services Center or Redfield or in nursing homes, that tax dollars take care of those who are vulnerable. Those are individuals that plowed and are plowing right now the highways so that we can be safe. There's individuals in emergency management that are rescuing people we don't even know about. And Dennis Dugard and Matt Michels didn't do any of that. We might be in front of the parade, but those are the people. Those are the people that make the music, including the woman that I just walked by who cleans the Capitol. They're the ones who we wouldn't be warm today in this room if they hadn't done this. And so it's with a great honor that I accept this, but it's for all of those people over the years that implement our ideas. 100 years ago, the governor was Peter Norbeck, and he lectured the legislature about how many laws they were passing and not appropriating money to implement those laws, whether it was regulation of tobacco or taking care of our natural resources or helping people settle in South Dakota. And so our time has come, and will go after this year, but these people who are quiet servants in every area deserve to be recognized, and at the same time recognize that we would not be able to have the society that we have without people defending our freedoms. And that one of those main freedoms is to have a life that's better and continue to live our dreams. And the way we do that is through industry and commerce and individuals who are risk takers and David's groups that are builders, coordinators, idea makers, and that we can buy things and transact in commerce, and then we tax it. Surprise, surprise. And at this time, I'm going to hand out, and we'll show people what we're getting ready to do, and then I'd like to take questions as it relates to the budget. For those who are listening, Bailey will, on her email, can PDF this to you so that you can see what we're talking about. And it's a pie chart that comes from the budget that the governor and I submitted to the legislature at the beginning. And the pie chart talks about our general funds. We have 3 funds. One is general fund, one's other, one's federal. I'm going to just talk about, if you think about your homes and you're sitting down, Karen and Matt sit down and we'll say, this is what our salary is, this is what our expenses are. Well, where did the salary come from? Being lieutenant governor, what are the expenses? Housing and rent for the apartment in Pier, food, look at me, I spend a lot of money on food, and we have entertainment, those things. Well, this happens in your government, and for you within media educators that you are, understand if you look at the pie, it's called receipts. And for people who will be watching, I'll hold it up to the extent that you'll be able to see it. You may not in the glare, but the pie chart talks about our revenue. So in homes, I don't know if you could see that with the glare, but in our homes, if you think of where your revenue is coming from, your businesses, for the state of South Dakota, the vast majority of our money comes from sales tax, 62%. So if it was $1, 62 cents of that dollar has come from sales tax. That's remitted by me when I go and buy something at one of David's member stores, or I happen to go get a car, I happened to go get a pop, whatever it might be. And what we are losing is the transactional cost when those people are not in South Dakota, but we're shipping things from e-commerce. And that is what our lawsuit is about in April that you've covered. And we will ascertain whether we're victorious in having the ability to be able to collect and have that remitted, because fundamentally it is unfair to David's membership, to our Main Street people, and from all levels of services that we all rely on. There isn't anybody on those mail order, mail and drop. Those people don't really care about our highways or educational system. We do, and there has to be a better way to collect and remit. As we go around this pie, another large area that I've highlighted right here is a tax that we put on construction. It's called the contractor's excise tax. My executive assistant, who's one of my many brains, husband, is a plumbing contractor, very expert. If he comes and takes care of my home, plumbing-wise, in addition to the sales tax on the shower, there's an additional tax that contractors that collect, and it is a lot of money, and we remit it. We're one of the few states that does that, but as you look at insurance taxation, bank taxation, revenue that we get out of our investments, telecommunication, phones, etc., that is all what we would refer to as commerce, transactions, part of something that doesn't exist in a lot of other countries, where you're able to have an idea, go into business, just like some of you here and those listening, and then be able to have that idea become revenue making, and at the same time then contribute to our society so that we have a qualified workforce, that we are safe, that government will keep us safe from somebody that might do us harm or from the weather, and that we have the ability to be educated, and that we have a free education that will help us. And so in order to meet that, the expenditures are the flip side. And this is exactly where we're at in the next 2 weeks, and that is, we know where our revenues are because the legislature in its wisdom has set those numbers early on. And as a result of that, we need to ascertain where should these funds be spent. A vast majority of that is already dictated by need. And that is at the top here, it's to take care of people that we were talking about. Our child protection service individuals, law enforcement, people in behavioral health facilities, individuals who are poor that can't afford food, that need nursing home care, that are in adjustment training centers, when the list goes on and on, taking care of our people. And then over here we have Board of Regents, which is our university system, and state and local assistance to schools. You know, we have over 13, 48, almost 49%, so almost half of our budget is for education. Almost half of the budget is for education, and we've been growing that. We have 6% of our budget that takes care of corrections, is going ahead and keeping people in prison, trying to rehabilitate them along with our court system. And the rest of this, even the operation of government, is very, very small. So the reason that I bring this up is the process that we're going on here, just like the federal government, is largely dictated by not only the governor's proposal, but what is our ability to be able to budget with funds. And as you know, we came in with a zero for any state employees or for schools or for providers, that is medical providers. But again, I point to the economy, the individuals who've been working hard in David's group, the South Dakota Chamber organizations throughout, and partnering with us to say these are things we need to do. We need to increase our revenue from sales tax that's going away because of online sales. But as a champion, your organization has been to support those efforts because we all are in this together. And the skilled workforce piece begets good business opportunities, begets good roads, and puts us in great positions to not only pay our public servants appropriately, recognize them, but also those that are acting in place of our public services, such as nursing home, behavioral health centers, alcohol and drug treatment, and everything. And so collapsing all of that into where we're headed in the next weeks, we could not do that in our society. And I've lived places, as you've heard me say, in the military around the world where this system does not exist. It does not work. It's not a free exchange, not only of funds, but of ideas that we are having. And for your ability to ask questions, criticize, actually give us very good ideas. And so that's why I asked David to be here. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions as well. But I'll open it up now to any questions that you have about where we're headed.
Being on the same track with that Supreme Court case coming up, I think they said for April 17th.
Yes.
That was announced.
Yep.
Yesterday.
That's right, Lee.
What would you hope the outcome would be, and how would that impact you as well?
I'll tell you the procedure, and then Mr. Owen can certainly talk about his experiences as well. The United States Supreme Court has agreed to hear the case. It is a very rare thing, Lee, as you've covered, but everybody who might not have heard about this, sometimes when we transact business, if you go onto Amazon, which is what pops into mind, there can be some purchases that they have agreed to when it's in their warehouses that they'll remit the sales tax, both to my home of Yankton as well as to the state, 4.5 to the state and 2 to Yankton. But if I buy something from Lee that he's using this as the way to sell to me, then Lee is not collecting it from his place in South Dakota. And so we're losing all of that, and the people who are buying it aren't necessarily aware that they're not paying sales tax either.
The idea that we ought to collect and remit sales taxes for internet sales, to the Chamber's opinion, is having a tax structure that fits your economy. The economy is evolving that way. I want to give credit to the South Dakota Retailers Association that was intimately involved in constructing that law, and we helped them and the government pass that law, which is an expression that says this is how taxes should be done. If this is how our economy is evolving, this is how we should collect and remit. And not to go too far into the weeds, but the Supreme Court said at the time that it's an undue burden to know all the sales tax laws. And so South Dakota's been a leadership in first streamlining taxes and now saying, now you have an obligation because the computers and software can solve the undue problem. So our Attorney General will argue that, and we see it as a way of just balancing the tax structure to the economy.
We will anticipate, too, Lee and everyone, that the Supreme Court will rule. Yeah, probably one of the last cases it will report out at the end of June.
And I'm not intimately familiar with the case, but is basically what South Dakota is saying that if I buy a Phil Collins t-shirt from someone in California, that the storefront for me is my computer, which is situated in South Dakota, as opposed to that version.
Well, it's a great fact pattern due to my love of Phil Collins, and you know that, Lee, so that was excellent. The original case, which is why we have some optimism, was a North Dakota case with a catalog, and although there's still some catalogs around, that's how we all bought things quite a bit that you couldn't get at home. And the case was a North Dakota case, again, a state at the time that, like we do, depends a great deal on sales tax. And what they said is there was no connection to the seller through that to the state. They didn't have bricks and mortar. They really weren't there. And so consequently, the United States Constitution says you can't impair the ability to move between South Dakota and North Dakota and everything with your businesses, because that's what happened before, when we had the Confederacy, we had the different states before the Revolution. And so it was very clear that there needed to be federal control over that. And so the fact that they are taking this case, that connection is a fancy word called nexus, you drilled it. You drilled it exactly. That now my connection is my computer, or what it is that you're watching me electronically on could be fiber. And now you do have a connection because the internet has that connectivity. And to have 4 Supreme Court justices say we want to revisit this, as David indicated, the world changes. If facts change, we should look at whether or not we change our opinion. Other questions?
Governors in Washington, D.C., as you said, looking at more workforce development things. Also with Secretary of Labor Costa, they had support for the interstate licensure compact, which failed in the House. Is that still something? First of all, what's the governor's office opinion about that? And then also, is that kind of compact or that kind of method still something that
We are certainly disappointed that the bill died. I'm a registered nurse, and we've had a compact. In fact, I supported it legislatively when I was in the legislature, because a compact is a contract between states. We have them for emergency responses, and I could, get into Nebraska as a nurse because we've agreed on certain similar qualifications to protect the public. And this regulation that we're talking about is protecting the public, not professions. And so when we license individuals, there are some states that license over 1,000 different organizations, entities, and I'm not going to call them professions. It has nothing to do in those regards, in my estimation, with protecting the public. Regardless of that, I had the privilege of being out at Colonel Leo Thorsness' funeral last week, and Secretary of Air Force came over and mentioned to me, and I think that the governor mentioned this to you last time, that we really need to have for spouses that are in the military as they're following, like my wife was, as a nurse. She was a nurse, and to get licensed to where we went was difficult. And that should be seamless. They shouldn't lose any time. And so what we're going to talk about is ways that we can do that militarily, with the military, find other ways. And obviously it's too late this legislative session, but come up with other ideas that you've heard relative to licensure. That doesn't mean, Lee, that we don't have a lot of professional capability here to do temporary licensing. And so I'm sure that we're going to evaluate that, especially in the areas of trades and apprenticeships. And that's some of those things that they'll be talking about. By the way, if I pivot just a little, they will also be meeting at the Canadian Embassy with a dialogue relative to NAFTA, of course, which is very significant to us. Canada is our -- trading partner, and Mexico is our second one. I'm the chair of our National Lieutenant Governors Association. I've had panels on that. In a couple of weeks, we'll have another one on that and the Farm Bill in D.C. Because of, again, commerce.
Lieutenant Governor, can go back to the internet sales tax. As I understand it, it's case state being Wayfair, but to clarify, this would impact all online sales, not just Wayfair.
Yes, sir. Yeah, Patrick, thank you. It's actually the law, as David pointed out, was passed here 2 years ago, and it mandated that internet sales individuals be licensed here, just like David and the retailers' organizations are licensed, just like you're licensed. And as a result of that licensure, then you need to remit sales tax, and that if not, there's penalties, just like in your business. If you don't remit from something that you're selling for one of your clients, then there are penalties available. A number of organizations voluntarily signed agreements, I think over 100 somewhere, and then of course the largest one was Amazon. So Wayfair sued us saying, no, you can't do this. So Wayfair is actually the plaintiff against us. Our South Dakota Supreme Court quickly said, I'm sorry, but the United States Supreme Court says you're wrong. State of South Dakota, you lose. Wayfair wins. And there are many other individuals involved in this, but the answer is yes. Those similarly situated individuals, organizations that are selling into our state, is our argument, that is selling to a South Dakota resident with the South Dakota zip code, sales tax should be remitted.
If I understand it correctly, this is nationally precedent setting.
It is national, and I would tell you also, Patrick, as a lawyer, the amount of focus on this is very intriguing and interesting. Let me back up and say, with David was here when I was in the legislature and as speaker, Congress said, hey, if you can all get together and streamline what you're charging sales tax on, like sometimes a Kit Kat was food and a Rice Krispie bar was candy. And there's legitimacy to that. However, what happened, the sleight of hand is Congress said in this streamlining that once you get a certain number of states, then we'll go ahead and allow you, because it's so complex, that now you've got that clarified that you will be able to initiate a sales tax. Well, Congress, this is the newsflash, has problems getting things done. And so until late, obviously, they've moved some big things, but this is so controversial. They didn't uphold their bargain. We spent a lot of time on it. I will tell you that the streamlining has affected and helped our argument. As a result of that, when you ask the Supreme Court to take up a case, you've got to sell it. And so there's friends of the court, they call it, and we had numerous individuals from the retailers, the National Chamber organizations, other organizations saying, take this on, clarify it. You're hobbling commerce, you're hobbling infrastructures back home, and this will be not only precedent setting, but will receive quite a bit of national media because of its impact and the number of people that will want to argue for it.
Final question on this topic. Counties, roads, bridges, local infrastructure, all these people are looking at this as potentially helping correct a lot of their fiscal shortfalls. Could you put it down to that level of what it means to the city of Yankton, the city of Pierre, to the city of Sioux Falls? What kind of financial impact would this decision have if it were to be upheld by the Supreme Court?
You know, it's we have difficulties trying to figure out how many stars there are in the sky, is my analogy. You can stand out there and count, but you don't know how many have just sailed by that you can't see. And what I mean by that goofy analogy is there is a lot of transactional stuff that we just can't capture. So there's no way to know what the number is. I would say, though, let's clarify, the counties would receive very little as it relates to direct sales tax. But back in your homes, in my second home of Pierre, my wife the other day bought cupcakes for an event, and I looked at the sales tax, and not only is there 2%, but there's an extra B&B here, so it was 3% on top of what the state pays. And so it helps the cities and the city roads and, you know, the shoveling around here and the cost of doing that to clean. So it would indeed increase. There's no doubt in my mind. But more importantly, strike that. As importantly is it will level the playing field among the retailer businesses and businesses such as yours. That's unfair. I mean, it's a 7 or 8% sales for me to go online and then, you know, get video services. That's unfair to people who are here dedicating their lives, and those folks don't participate. They could be in California with the t-shirt. They're not helping out our economy. And it's not that purchasers are doing anything evil, but it will help our cities. The last point of this is we don't know how much has been eroded. We can guess, and the Supreme Court will maybe get into that, but that's an irrelevant argument. We do believe that Wayfair might make that argument, but I'm not in the middle of that. I really do believe, and we're cautiously optimistic, them taking the case, then we'll see it as the governor says, hopefully we'll have more revenue, but we don't count on it until it's in the bank, and that's what will happen in the cities. Anything that you wish to add?
This is the time to get this solved. We're at the front. The internet sales, doing commerce through electronic methods is only going to grow. It's not going to shrink. And so if we can get this solved in the middle times, then they can't use the argument that it's too massive later. So this is a perfect time to solve this problem.
Lawmakers are starting to craft the budget. Started this year a little bit. It sounds like there's an additional 18 million of what was, I guess at low is projected. Does the governor's office have any, priorities, any ways they want to steer the legislature as they start crafting that budget? What would they like to see that money?
As the governor put in his budget, and as he said in the budget address, Lee, that when we look at the pie chart I handed out, our state employees fundamentally did not receive any increases last year, and then with health insurance premiums actually went backwards. And we aren't anywhere close to market for our employees. And I still think that the vast majority of people really understand that value. There were certainly a few people that say, oh, well, you work for the state, you're just hanging out, leaning on a broom. Far from the truth. Because I've seen people hanging out on brooms in other governmental entities, and it doesn't happen here. And so from a social justice perspective, he is very committed to saying, I came in at a balanced budget because of what we saw, and now we see more. And therefore, we should negotiate with the people through the legislature for increased salaries, for increases in the salary for our state public servants, for schools, and for providers. I mean, that's how it always goes. And I think that when we get down to that last week, the analysis will be, should it be equal in percentages, maybe not in dollars, or shall we shift that around? And so I think that's important, and you've seen his other priorities that we've already funded, for example, for our military and those things. So that's why he put it 0 all the way across, hopeful the legislature and the revenues and commerce would raise it up, but those all collectively will be the priorities. At the same time, one of the things I really want to thank the legislature for, as you well know how focused I am on procedure, because great process yields good results. May not be the result that you want, but it's at least fair. And so to be able to, this will be hard for most of you to comprehend, but usually what we're talking about right now took place the last 2 days of the session. And the institutional stress is unfair, it's not democratic, it doesn't allow an openness to a dialogue of, well, how much money do you have? And then just kind of doing accounting gimmicks. And that was an important thing for the governor and I to institutionalize. Just like today. When I first came into the legislature, for years they had never met this deadline that we have today, which is the last day to either pass or defeat bills out of the respective House of origin. We call it crossover, but all Senate bills today have to pass out or be defeated. House bills from the House have to pass or defeat. When I first came in, I'm sitting there, and I think a number of you know that I'm a mutant. I was reading through this book, asking my seatmate, I said, what is this crossover day? And he explained it to me. And so then we're getting to it, and I see 3 pages of bills. I said, my God, we'll be here until 3 in the morning. Oh, well, we suspend the rules. We never meet that rule. And I went, well, then why? I mean, what is that telling these young people? That we don't adhere to the rules? What's that telling the public? You're not adhering to the rules. Well, needless to say, there's only a couple of people, dinosaurs like me, left that have ever experienced that. Now it's the way it is. It's just the way it is. You are in it institutionally, and that's what I think has happened from an appropriations perspective. It has just been spectacular. Zach?
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Yes,
Thanks for
sir.
your time today. I've got a couple questions for you. First one for David. Just your impressions on the legislative session so far, the things that you've seen, if there's anything. You know, Jerry Oster likes to refer to you as the oracle and a legislative observer. What sorts of things have you observed about this session?
I like legislative sessions. I work for an amazing group of people at the board of directors of the South Dakota Chamber that gets this process. And so all sessions are kind of unique. We've seen 100 more bills. I don't think we've seen some of the epic fights. Certainly the alcohol bills have been interesting. We did a lot of discussions about initiatives and referendums, and I'll be very candid with you. A lot of the business community finds that annoying, but when we get down to making changes, we're making fine-tuned changes, and that's been interesting to be a part of. If you're using Jerry Oster as your guide, you need to rethink a few things. You use that as you please. It's been a good, active session. We get frustrated at some of the firearms discussions, at some of the immigrant discussions. Those discussions are led by a minority of the people, and this process goes through the process, and we get on to the real business. But let me make a broader point, which is why we recognized Lieutenant Governor for his career of service. The Chamber and other business groups stands in this seam between public policy and private enterprise. And sometimes we overlook the fact that markets And business needs what government supplies: rule of law, educated workforce, infrastructure, and quality of life when it comes to parks. So we're not in a mode up here that's anti-government. We're proudly tax crabby, but as the Lieutenant Governor's pointed out, you use the business community to collect and remit taxes. So that's a broader statement. He has symbolized this for a very long career, and is a solution-oriented focus, and we wanted to salute that. But I think this session's been very good. And if you've got specific issues I can react to, we've been busy, but it's a good group of legislators and doing the right work.
This goes back to the internet sales tax discussion, and I suppose it's a bit of shooting a bow in a dark barn with a blindfold on. But if these internet sales taxes were enacted today and were in a part of the tight budget discussion, how not tight would we be looking at? I mean, how much more, we're talking right now about, you know, obviously the extra revenue has adjusted those numbers up a little bit. If we had this internet sales tax money that is projected to come in, should this happen, what would that discussion be looking like today? Would we be worried about, will state employees be able to get increases? Could we fund the schools and give more to the providers? How much extra leeway would that prevent or present if you could apply it to this budget?
We do not know, Zach. I mean, it's not even close. I think that if I may just jump off on that, if we are successful, don't want to jinx it, it's as possible that there's implementing time and lag through this upcoming fiscal year. Our fiscal year, as you know, a lot of people watching may not know, but we start July 1. So it's very possible if it's, you know, it'd be almost at the same time, but then take quite a bit of time. I'm going to give you an analogy, and that is we went through a horrendous federal discussion on modifying taxes. And you covered it, or the, the APs or any sort of news service that you have, the Dakota Radio Group have, covered it. But it doesn't come alive until you saw what happened to your withholding. And when the withholding schedule came into place, now people are talking different. And so once you saw that withholding, then you could go home and you could say, well, I've got this extra that's not subject to taxation. That's my analogy. That we will not know until it's in the pocket. And as a matter of fact, when I said we, I'd be surprised if it happens on the governor's and my watch. But you'll be the first to know because we put it out there. We're one of the few states that immediately reports out where we're headed. Now, with that being said, what we do know is the vast majority of internet sales is done in the last 3 months of the year, which makes sense. I mean, it is amazing to go up north of where we're from and you see a couple of aircraft come in. Patrick and I have talked about this. They're coming in and it's very sparse, but you've got all these trucks then unloading. You can kind of imagine what color trucks they are, zipping around every day the last 8-9 weeks of the year throughout northern South Dakota and southern and mid South Dakota and southern North Dakota. I mean, it's phenomenal. But of course, you cover that, you understand it.
One final question for you, and that is earlier this week, the State Rail Board held their meeting, a very short meeting. The main thing that came out of that was the Dakota and Iowa Railroad's desire to possibly purchase the state-owned rail line that I believe runs from Canton down to Elk Point. Any thoughts on if that were to go through, what it would mean for the state? Is obviously some extra revenue coming in.
Well, unfortunately for you, the railroad guy is in D.C. The governor is a true railroad expert. And I've learned a long time ago, especially in my background in medicine, I don't make anything up. So I have no idea, Zach. Yeah, thank you for the question. That's great. Yes, sir.
Would you care to introduce the gentleman up front
I will. Just a second. Is there anybody online that's for nobody listening? Yeah. Well, one of the thank you before we close, unless there's any other questions. Thank you for the question. You have one more? Okay. One of the things that's very important to me, and sometime you can stop by my office to people in the room and I'll show you, but I didn't come from this. I think a number of you know my background. I had no experience with it until I became a page. We called him a messenger. And one of the things that demystified it for me, I was very scared, not very self-assured. My father had left our house at this time, and so I'm sitting in some turmoil with my mom back home with kids. But I'm doing this as a junior in high school, and I was so impressed by how kind people were. And I've tried to continue to give that kindness to people who come here, especially during the legislative session, which I enjoy. And so these two young people are with me. This is David Owen's son, Gentry, and he is a 7th grader at Whittier in Sioux Falls. And then Jack Kagi is a 9th grader at Sioux Falls Christian. And they're shadowing me today. And I know young Jack here because his sister was our intern. And then I know Gentry because he's related to David by birth, if you know what I mean. And so they're honorary stash wearers today. They've got lapels of mustaches, looking very good. And so they've been following me around today, and we're going to have them up in session because they'll be the leaders. And as you have covered here, a number of you, we have a lot of young people that come here, and it's important for them to understand that they'll be the next ones, elected or involved in affecting how the world is run by those who show up. The world is run by those who show up. Lee.
Obviously, you're not here every week doing the press conferences. You get final one. I just wanted to ask if you thought maybe your legacy as Senate President and Governor might be tips on growing a better mustache.
You know, I'm starting to get highlights in my hair and mustache. I mean, it's starting to turn a little white. I think that's the style. I think that if I could impart on people, and will never stop, is that this is not that difficult. And if you want to engage in a topic that's interesting to you, you can learn from the broadcasting piece. The access to information. The beautiful part of our state is we're one of few states where any bill that's introduced has to have a hearing. That's very rare. And that avoids a lot, even issues to the north of us, where you can say individually, I don't like Lee's bill, and I don't like Lee, or I don't like this guy's organization. We're not going to hear that bill. The history of that, and how solemn this place is, and how beautiful it is. I'm not sure, and the governor and I bristle at discussions of legacy. I think it's more of, there's nobody here that can tell us who was here when they built this beautiful building. You couldn't even name the individuals, right? And so I think that we've got to understand that by the grace of God, we've had this time, and that we'll be remembered for various deeds, not by our names. And part of that is what you just saw here, is these young men will come up. They'll be pages. They'll be involved. The young pages that we have will become interns. We have 3 legislators that were prior interns or pages. And that has to perpetuate. That has to get you involved. And then also understanding that although we have some cranky times, to steal David's word, that there's a lot of civility here. I think to demystify what's happening in anti-social media out there, there's a lot of civility, a lot of friendships from very few just hot political button issues. But we are friends. And one of my best friends here is from the northwestern part of the state, a place that I never would have been And what he always says is, I never thought that I would become such good friends with an East River nurse, male nurse lawyer. So there's no way that was going to ever happen. And that's the magic that happens here. I would never have met you. And I think that that's a critical piece for us, why we love this state and can perpetuate it, and how many people love it when they come here. So. We good? Well, again, thank you for everybody here. More importantly, keep it up, because you're really, contrary to the barrage that happens nationally, there's a lot of people that rely on you for the information. And the discourse and disagreement is thankfully healthy. And as somebody who's served, I would leave this for everybody. We have close to 300 individuals that are deployed in war out of our state that are through our National Guard, many more that have come others. I please ask you to keep them in their prayers, and then if you know family members, to ask them how you can help them, both Army and Air Guard. And we're going to be at war the rest of our lives, the rest of these children's lives, these young people rather. And so, as my brother, who's an Army colonel, says, do you want an away game or a home game? Well, this is how we have an away game, so we've got to take care of the home front. So thank you very much for this honor, and David for joining me. And we're ready for crossover day. The Senate's going to start here in a few minutes. And for those of you who are watching, thank you for your input and the opportunity to serve you. Thanks.